Lieutenant Commander Victoria Tor Hayes stood in the hallway of the federal courthouse in Arlington, Virginia, wearing her dress uniform. Her medals hung from her chest. The Medal of Valor, 2 bronze stars, the Purple Heart. Each one represented a moment where she had chosen to do the right thing, even when it was dangerous, even when it cost her something. Today, someone was trying to take them away. The lawsuit had come out of nowhere, or so it seemed. But Torai knew better. Lawsuits didn't come out of nowhere. They came from people with grudges, with power, with access to good lawyers. In Torai's case, it came from all three. The plaintiff was retired General Curtis Blackwood, and he had something to prove. Torai had served as a Navy helicopter pilot for 17 years. She was exceptional at what she did, one of the best pilots in the fleet. She had a record that spoke for itself, perfect safety record, dozens of successful missions, and then there was the day that changed everything. 3 years ago, Torai was flying a medical evacuation mission over Afghanistan. The call came in, wounded soldiers pinned down by enemy fire, 2 kilometers from her position. She was the closest asset. She made the decision to go. What she found was a nightmare. The soldiers were pinned in a valley with insurgents on both sides. A direct approach would be suicide. But there was another way, a canyon route that was narrow, dangerous, and technically impossible to navigate in a helicopter. Torai did it anyway. She got the soldiers out, all of them. Nobody died, nobody was left behind. For that, she received the Medal of Valor, the highest honor a military pilot could receive. It was given at a ceremony at the Pentagon. The Secretary of Defense was there. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff was there. News cameras captured it all. The problem was that General Blackwood had been the commanding officer in that region at the time. In his official report, he had claimed credit for the operation. He said it was his tactical guidance that made the rescue possible. But in the post-operation interviews with investigators, it became clear that Torai had acted independently, using her own judgment, her own skill, her own courage. General Blackwood didn't like being corrected. He didn't like being shown up by a woman. And he definitely didn't like that his name wasn't mentioned in the Medal of Valor citation. So he sued. He claimed that Torai's medal was obtained fraudulently, that she had misrepresented her role in the operation, that she had lied to gain recognition, that she should be stripped of all her honors and face criminal charges for fraud. It was absurd. It was also devastatingly effective. The lawsuit had made national news. Suddenly, Torai wasn't a hero anymore. She was a woman under investigation for lying about her accomplishments. The narrative shifted. The same people who had celebrated her suddenly questioned whether she deserved the celebration. Social media exploded with conspiracy theories. Conservative outlets questioned whether women should be in combat roles at all. Some people even suggested this was all part of some diversity scheme, that minorities were being given medals they didn't deserve. Torai's life changed overnight. The Navy stood by her officially, but behind closed doors, things were different. The attention made people nervous. If Blackwood won this lawsuit, it would make the Navy look bad. So Torai felt the shift. She felt the way people looked at her. She felt the doubt. Her best friend, Captain James Morrison, had tried to reassure her. They'd served together for 12 years. James was a fighter pilot, and he understood what it meant to operate on instinct, on training, on the ability to make split-second decisions that saved lives. "You earned that medal," James had told her. "Everyone who was there knows you earned it. Don't let this old man's ego destroy what you know about yourself." But it was hard, it was so hard. Now, walking into the courthouse on a cold November morning, Torai felt the weight of every eye on her. News cameras flashed. Reporters called out her name. There were protesters on both sides, some supporting her, some demanding justice for General Blackwood, some there for no reason other than to be part of the spectacle. Her lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia Chen, met her in the hallway. "We're going to walk in there and tell the truth," Patricia said. "That's all we can do. The evidence supports you. The witness testimony supports you. We're going to be fine." Torai wanted to believe her, but she'd lived long enough to know that truth wasn't always enough. The courtroom was packed. Sitting in the front row was General Blackwood himself, a large man in his 70s with a stern face. Sitting beside him was his legal team, expensive lawyers from one of the most prestigious firms in Washington. The judge entered. The case was called to order. Patricia began by laying out the facts. She showed the official military records. She showed the after-action reports. She showed the testimony of the soldiers who had been rescued, soldiers who said, without hesitation, that Torai's skill and courage had saved their lives. Then General Blackwood's lawyers took over. They brought in expert witnesses who questioned whether Torai's actions had actually been necessary. They suggested alternative routes that might have worked. They implied that she had taken unnecessary risks to make herself look good. They presented emails and memos, taken out of context, that made it sound like Torai was boastful about her accomplishments. None of it was true. None of it reflected what had actually happened, but it sounded plausible to people who hadn't been there. The trial lasted 2 weeks. By the end of it, Torai was emotionally exhausted. She'd had to sit and listen to her honor questioned. She'd had to defend decisions she'd made in split seconds while under extreme pressure. She'd had to prove that she deserved to wear the medals on her chest. The judge took 3 weeks to render a decision. Those 3 weeks were the longest of Torai's life. She took a leave of absence from her duties. She went home to her parents' house in Portland, Oregon, where she'd grown up. Her mother, Dorothy, was a retired nurse. Her father, Richard, was a retired teacher. They'd always been proud of their daughter. They'd never once suggested she should have done anything different with her life. "This is going to work out," her father said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the rain. "You don't know that?" Torai replied. "No," he agreed, "but I know you, and I know that people are beginning to see who you really are. It takes a while sometimes, but the truth always comes out." Torai wanted to believe him, but she'd learned that the truth wasn't always powerful enough to overcome money, power, and the kind of determination that comes from wounded pride. The decision came down on a cold Thursday morning. Torai received an email from her lawyer. She didn't open it right away. She sat at her parents' kitchen table and stared at her phone for 5 minutes before she had the courage to read the words. "Judge rules in favor of Blackwood," the subject line said. Torai's heart stopped. She opened the email with shaking hands. The judge's decision was lengthy, but the conclusion was clear. The evidence supported the idea that General Blackwood's tactical guidance had been essential to the success of the operation. The judge ruled that Torai's Medal of Valor should be stripped. Her other commendations were under review. Torai read the words, and she felt something inside her break. Not her spirit, not her courage, not her sense of self-worth. What broke was her faith in the system. She had served that system. She had bled for that system, and now that system was saying she didn't deserve the recognition she'd earned. The news hit immediately. Media outlets covered it. The conservative outlets that had questioned her accomplishments now triumphantly declared her a fraud. The outlets that had supported her called it a travesty of justice. Torai turned off her phone. She went into her childhood bedroom and lay on her bed and cried. Not quietly, not with dignity. Angry, frustrated tears of someone who had done everything right and was being punished anyway. Her mother sat beside her and didn't say anything. Sometimes there was nothing to say. That evening, Torai's commanding officer called. Captain Stephanie Reynolds was a good woman, a fair woman. She was also put in an impossible position. "I want you to know," Stephanie said carefully, "that I personally believe the judge made the wrong decision. But officially, the Navy has to comply with the court's ruling. We're going to need you to return your Medal of Valor and your Bronze Stars. It's just procedure, but it's necessary." Torai closed her eyes. "When?" "As soon as possible, but Torai, this isn't the end. There are appeals, there are other options. Don't give up." After they hung up, Torai sat in the darkness of her childhood bedroom and wondered if anyone had told her what to do when the system that you dedicated your life to started working against you. She didn't have an answer. What she didn't know was that her story was about to reach someone who did have answers, someone with the power to make things right, someone who was about to walk into a situation and change everything. General Margaret Maggie Torres was a 4-star general who served as the commander of United States Naval Forces. She was the highest-ranking woman in the entire Navy, and she had fought for every inch of that position. At 65 years old, with 40 years of service, she had seen discrimination, she had seen injustice, and she had learned how to fight back without losing herself in the process. She read about Torai's case in the newspaper. Actually, she didn't read about it. One of her staff members brought it to her attention because they thought it was important. The staff member, a junior officer named Lieutenant Rebecca Martinez, had flagged the story and left a note on General Torres' desk. "Ma'am, I thought you should see this." General Torres read about the trial. She read about the judge's decision. She read about Torres' background and service record. And then she did something that would change everything. She made a phone call. She called Admiral James Richardson, who was retired from active duty but still had significant influence. Admiral Richardson was the man who had supported Colonel Sarah Mitchell years earlier when she fought for her command. He was a man who understood the importance of standing up for what was right. "I just heard about this case," General Torres said without preamble. "The lieutenant commander in Arlington, Victoria Hayes." "I read about it," Admiral Richardson said. "Unfortunate situation." "It's not unfortunate, it's injustice," General Torres said. "I've reviewed her file, I've looked at the records. She earned that medal, and some washed-up general with wounded pride convinced a judge otherwise." Admiral Richardson listened. "I need to do something about this," General Torres continued. "But I need to be careful. If I just override a court decision, it looks like the military doesn't respect civilian courts. It looks like we're above the law. I need something that will make it clear that this was wrong." "What are you thinking?" Admiral Richardson asked. "I'm thinking it's time for a full investigation. Not just into the original operation, but into General Blackwood's motives, his history, his pattern of behavior." "That's risky," Admiral Richardson said. "He's going to fight back." "Let him," General Torres replied. She hung up and immediately called her chief of staff. "I want a complete file on General Curtis Blackwood, everything, his entire military career, his service record, his conflicts, his controversies, everything that's been documented." The file that came back was very interesting. General Blackwood had a pattern. Throughout his career, he had claimed credit for operations he hadn't led. He had demoted officers who questioned him. He had a reputation for not tolerating challenges to his authority. And there was something else. 5 years ago, a female officer under his command had filed a harassment complaint. The complaint was investigated, but Blackwood had friends in high places. The complaint was quietly dismissed. General Torres read through the file and felt her blood boil. She requested a meeting with Torres Hayes. Torres was back at her base in California preparing to turn over her medals. She received the call from General Torres' office asking her to come to San Diego for a meeting. She almost said no. What was the point? The case was decided. The medals were going to be stripped. Nothing was going to change that. But something in her, maybe it was her father's voice, maybe it was her own stubborn refusal to give up, made her say yes. She drove to San Diego in her car, a 4-hour drive that gave her plenty of time to think. She thought about the operation in Afghanistan. She thought about the soldiers she'd rescued. She thought about the moment she'd realized that the canyon route was the only way out, and she'd made the decision to take it, knowing it was dangerous, knowing she might not come back. She'd been at peace with that decision then. She was still at peace with it now. The medal had been nice, but what mattered was that those soldiers had gone home to their families. General Torres met her in her office. The office was large and formal, decorated with photos of ships and operations, with commendations and awards, with symbols of a lifetime of service and achievement. General Torres was a tall woman with silver hair and sharp eyes. She wore her uniform with the ease of someone who had been born to wear it. "Lieutenant Commander Hayes," she said, extending her hand. "Thank you for coming." They shook hands, and Torres felt the firmness of the general's grip, the weight of her presence. "Please sit down," General Torres said. Torres sat. "I've reviewed your file," the general said. "I've reviewed the trial. I've reviewed General Blackwood's entire career, and I want you to know that I believe the judge made a serious error in judgment." Torres' heart jumped, but she didn't say anything. "However," General Torres continued, "I can't just overturn a civilian court decision. That's not how this works. What I can do is investigate the pattern of behavior that led to this lawsuit in the first place. I can look at whether General Blackwood has a history of taking credit for work he didn't do. I can look at whether he has a history of retaliating against people who threaten his authority. And if I find that pattern, I can make a recommendation to the Secretary of the Navy that his case should be reopened, that new evidence should be considered, that justice should be done." "You would do that?" Torres asked. "I'm already doing it," General Torres said. I started this morning, and I'm going to need your help. I need you to be willing to talk about what happened. Not just the operation, but everything around it. General Blackwood's behavior, his comments, his tactics. Of course, Torai said, whatever you need. General Torres leaned back in her chair. You know what I realized when I became a general? I realized that I didn't reach this position to be quiet. I didn't reach this position to follow orders that don't make sense. I reached this position to use my authority to make things right. That's what I'm going to do with yours. Over the next 3 months, General Torres conducted a thorough investigation. She interviewed soldiers who had served under General Blackwood. She reviewed his official reports. She uncovered a pattern of behavior that was shocking in its scope and consistency. She found evidence of at least 7 different operations where Blackwood had claimed credit for tactical decisions he hadn't made. She found evidence of at least 4 officers who had been reassigned or demoted after challenging his authority. She found the harassment complaint from 5 years ago, which had been dismissed not on its merits, but because of pressure from Blackwood's allies. General Torres documented all of it. Then she did something bold. She held a press conference. She stood in front of cameras at the Pentagon and announced the results of her investigation. She presented the evidence. She talked about a pattern of behavior that had gone unchecked for decades, and she announced that she was recommending a full court-martial for General Curtis Blackwood on charges of fraud, abuse of authority, and obstruction of justice. The news exploded. Major media outlets covered it. Documentaries were made. Investigations were launched. It turned out that General Blackwood's pattern of behavior had affected more people than anyone had realized. Other officers came forward with their own stories. But General Torres didn't stop there. She went to the Secretary of the Navy and requested that Torai's case be reopened. She presented all the evidence she'd found. She made the argument that Torai's medal had been taken under false pretenses, that the judge had been misled by incomplete information, that justice demanded it be restored. The Secretary of the Navy agreed. The decision was made to reopen the case. A new trial was scheduled. This time, General Torres would be testifying as a character witness. This time, the full scope of General Blackwood's pattern of behavior would be presented to the judge. General Blackwood tried to fight back. His lawyers filed motions to prevent the new evidence from being heard. They claimed the investigation was politically motivated. They tried everything they could think of to stop the case from being reopened. None of it worked. The night before the new trial, Torai received a call from General Torres. I just wanted you to know, the general said, that tomorrow we're going to tell the truth, all of it, and this time the truth is going to win. How can you be so sure? Torai asked. Because, General Torres said, I'm not going to let anything else happen. I'm going to stand in that courtroom and I'm going to make sure that judge understands exactly what kind of man General Blackwood is. I'm going to make sure he understands exactly what kind of officer you are, and I'm going to make sure that justice is served. When Torai hung up the phone, she felt something she hadn't felt in months: hope. The new trial drew even more media attention than the first one. General Torres' investigation had already made headlines, but now the full story was about to be told in open court. News outlets set up permanent camps outside the courthouse. Spectators lined up hours early to get seats in the gallery. Torai wore her dress uniform again. The medals were gone now, but the uniform still meant something. It still represented who she was and what she'd done. The judge was different this time. Judge Patricia Morrison was known for her meticulous attention to detail and her unwillingness to be swayed by anything but evidence. The prosecution, representing the Navy, presented its case first. They brought in the soldiers Torai had rescued. All 3 of them were there, all 3 of them willing to testify about what had happened that day in the Afghan Valley. The first soldier, Sergeant Michael Torres, sat in the witness box and spoke about the moment he realized they were pinned down. He talked about the radio call requesting a helicopter. He talked about the impossibly narrow canyon that would have to be navigated to reach them. I didn't think it was going to work, Sergeant Torres said. I thought we were going to die there, and then Commander Hayes came in, and she did something I've never seen before or since. She flew that helicopter through a canyon that seemed impossible, literally impossible, and she got us out, every single one of us. That's not someone making a tactical mistake. That's someone at the absolute peak of their skill and courage. The second soldier, Corporal Danny Chen, testified about the medical emergencies they faced. One of the soldiers had been critically wounded. The helicopter landing zone was unstable. Torai had to make split-second decisions about how to manage the situation while flying an extremely difficult route. "She saved my friend's life," Corporal Chen said. "If she hadn't gotten us out when she did, that soldier would have died. And the only way we got out was because she knew how to pilot that helicopter better than anyone I've ever seen." The third soldier, Private James White, was the most emotional. He talked about sitting in the back of the helicopter, terrified, watching Torai navigate the canyon, watching her hands on the controls, watching her stay calm and focused while everything around her was chaos. "She was the only thing that got us home," Private White said, and his voice cracked with emotion. "She was the only thing." Then General Torres took the stand. She wore her dress uniform with all her medals and insignia. She sat with perfect posture, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of decades of experience. She testified about her investigation into General Blackwood. She presented evidence of his pattern of behavior. She talked about the other officers whose work had been stolen. She talked about the harassment complaint that had been dismissed. Then the prosecutor asked her the crucial question. "Based on your investigation, General Torres, in your professional opinion, was General Blackwood involved in the tactical planning of the operation that Lieutenant Commander Hayes flew?" "No," General Torres said firmly. "General Blackwood was hundreds of miles away at regional headquarters when this operation occurred. The tactical planning was done by field commanders on the ground. The execution was entirely the responsibility of Commander Hayes. General Blackwood's role was administrative. He received reports after the fact. He did not plan this operation." "And in your opinion, General Torres, did Commander Hayes receive fair consideration in the original trial?" "No," General Torres said. "Commander Hayes was not given fair consideration because critical evidence was not presented. Evidence of General Blackwood's pattern of taking credit for work he didn't do. Evidence of his history of retaliation. Evidence of his character. The judge in the first trial made a decision based on incomplete information." The defense attorneys tried to discredit General Torres, but it was futile. She'd been a naval officer for 40 years. She had impeccable credentials. She had nothing to gain from this testimony and everything to lose if she was found to be lying. No judge or jury member was going to believe that this woman was making things up. Then came the moment that changed everything. General Blackwood took the stand in his own defense. His lawyers had advised against it, but Blackwood insisted. He wanted to defend his honor. He wanted to tell his side of the story. The prosecutor asked him a simple question. "General Blackwood, did you participate in the tactical planning of the operation on the day that Lieutenant Commander Hayes conducted the rescue?" "I provided oversight," Blackwood said carefully. "That's not what I asked. Did you participate in the tactical planning?" "I received briefings before and after." "Before the operation?" "Yes, general updates." "Did you know that Commander Hayes was planning to use the canyon route?" Blackwood hesitated. It was just a moment, but everyone in the courtroom saw it. "I was made aware of possible routes." "Did you express approval or disapproval of the canyon route?" "I trusted my commanders in the field to make the appropriate decisions." The prosecutor walked closer. "So you approved of a decision you were made aware of?" That's not." "And yet, General Blackwood, in your official report, you stated that you had provided the tactical guidance that allowed the successful execution of this operation. Those are your exact words." "I provided the tactical guidance." "Is that accurate?" "It is accurate in the sense that I..." "Yes or no, General Blackwood, did you provide the tactical guidance that allowed the successful execution of the rescue operation?" Blackwood's face had gone red. "The overall strategic framework came from my command. Without my oversight, the operation would never have been approved." "That's different than tactical guidance, isn't it, General Blackwood? Oversight is not the same as planning the specific tactics that a pilot uses to execute a rescue operation." Blackwood didn't answer. The prosecutor continued. "In fact, General Blackwood, isn't it true that you were angry when Commander Hayes received recognition for the operation? Isn't it true that you felt you should have received more credit?" "I don't appreciate the insinuation," Blackwood said. "It's not an insinuation, it's a question, a simple yes or no." My feelings about recognition are irrelevant. They're very relevant, General Blackwood, because your feelings about recognition appear to have motivated you to file a lawsuit claiming that Commander Hayes obtained her Medal of Valor fraudulently. Is that correct? Blackwood stood up. This is a witch hunt. This is a character assassination of a man who served his country with honor. Your Honor, the prosecutor said calmly, will you please instruct the witness to answer the question? The judge, who had been watching with an expression of barely concealed disgust, said quietly, General Blackwood, sit down and answer the question. I filed a lawsuit because I believed that the Medal of Valor citation was inaccurate, Blackwood said through gritted teeth. But you didn't believe it was inaccurate because of the facts. You believed it was inaccurate because you weren't credited enough. Isn't that correct? Blackwood didn't answer. The prosecutor moved on, but the damage was done. Everyone in that courtroom had seen the truth. General Blackwood was a man whose ego had been wounded, and he was willing to destroy another officer's career to soothe that wound. After Blackwood testified, the case was essentially over. The defense tried to present their arguments, but it was clear that no one was buying them. The judge took 1 week to render a decision. When he did, his statement was scathing. After reviewing all the evidence presented in this trial, the judge wrote, it is clear that General Curtis Blackwood engaged in a pattern of misrepresenting his role in military operations. It is further clear that he filed this lawsuit not because of any factual inaccuracy in the Medal of Valor citation, but because of wounded pride. The original trial was conducted with incomplete information. I am overturning the previous decision. Lieutenant Commander Victoria Hayes' Medal of Valor is restored. Her bronze stars are restored. All her commendations are restored. Furthermore, I am recommending that General Blackwood be prosecuted for perjury and fraud. The courtroom erupted. Reporters rushed out to file their stories. Cameras flashed. Spectators stood and applauded. And in the middle of it all, Torai sat quietly, tears running down her face. General Torres came to her after the decision and pulled her into an embrace. You did it, General Torres said. You stood up, you told the truth, and you won. We did it, Torai corrected. I couldn't have done this without you. No, General Torres said, stepping back and looking Torai in the eye. This was all you. I just made sure the truth came out. You're the one who had the courage to let it. The media celebration lasted for weeks. Torai's story became a symbol of justice being served, of the military finally standing up for one of its own, of truth triumphing over ego and power. She did interviews. She was invited to speak at universities. Women's organizations invited her to be a speaker at their events. Everyone wanted a piece of her victory. But underneath all the celebration, Torai was struggling. The trauma of the trial had taken a toll. She suffered from insomnia. She had nightmares. She'd been so focused on fighting, so focused on proving her worth, that she hadn't allowed herself to feel the weight of what had happened. A good friend, Captain James Morrison, noticed it. He'd been there throughout the trial, supporting her, but he also understood that she needed more help than just friendship. You should talk to someone, James said one evening. They were having dinner at a restaurant near the base. Someone professional, a therapist or a counselor. I'm fine, Torai said automatically. You're not fine, you're running on fumes, and it's okay to need help, it's not weakness. Torai knew he was right. She'd spent so long being strong, being tough, being the kind of person who didn't ask for help, that she'd forgotten how to accept it when it was offered. She started seeing a counselor at the base. Her name was Dr. Lisa Chen, and she was excellent at what she did. She didn't tell Torai what to feel or how to process her trauma. She just created a safe space for Torai to talk about it. In their sessions, Torai talked about the moment she realized the judge had ruled against her. She talked about the darkness of those 3 weeks waiting for the decision. She talked about the shame she felt, even though she hadn't done anything wrong. She talked about how it felt to have her honor questioned by someone in power. One thing I'm noticing, Dr. Chen said during one session, is that you're taking this very personally. And of course you are. It happened to you. But I'm wondering if you're also carrying some responsibility that isn't yours to carry. What do you mean? Torai asked. I mean that you seem to feel like it was your job to fix this. Your job to prove yourself. Your job to make sure everyone understood you were telling the truth. But that's not your job. Your job was just to tell the truth and let the system work. The system failing and then being fixed, that's not your responsibility. Tori sat with that for a moment. But it is, she said finally. Because if I don't stand up, who does? If I don't fight for myself, nobody else will. That's true, Dr. Chen agreed. But here's what I'm hearing. You're exhausted because you feel like you have to do it all by yourself. What if you let other people help? What if you accepted that standing up for yourself doesn't mean standing alone? Over time, with the help of therapy and with the support of friends like James and General Torres, Tori began to heal. Not forget, healing isn't forgetting. But she began to accept what had happened and to move forward. And then something unexpected happened. General Curtis Blackwood was convicted of perjury and fraud. He was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison. The conviction rocked the military establishment. Here was a man who had risen to the rank of general, who had commanded thousands of soldiers, who had been decorated for his service, and he was going to prison for lying and for abusing his power. When Tori heard the news, she felt a complicated mix of emotions. Relief, certainly. Vindication, definitely. But also a strange sadness for the man who had chosen power and pride over integrity. She wrote a letter to General Blackwood. She didn't mail it. She just wrote it as a way of processing her feelings. She wrote about how she understood that he'd felt his authority was threatened. She wrote about how she understood that being corrected in front of your peers was humiliating. She wrote about how she understood that he was a product of a military culture that had taught him that strength meant being infallible. But, she wrote, strength is also about admitting when you're wrong. Strength is about accepting that other people can be right sometimes. Strength is about having enough confidence in yourself that you don't need to tear down other people to feel okay about yourself. She never mailed the letter, but writing it helped her let go of the anger she'd been carrying. 6 months after the trial ended, General Torres called Tori. She had news. I'm recommending you for promotion to commander, General Torres said. And more than that, I'm recommending you for a position in the Pentagon. I want you to lead a new initiative we're starting called the Truth and Accountability Task Force. It's going to investigate patterns of abuse of authority in the military. We're going to make sure that what happened to you never happens to anyone else again. Me, Tori asked. I'm not a lawyer or an investigator. No, but you understand what it's like to stand up and tell the truth. You understand what it costs, and you understand how important it is to get justice. That's what we need leading this task force. Are you interested? Tori took a moment to think about it. This was a huge opportunity. It was also a big step away from being a pilot, away from the thing she loved most. Can I still fly? She asked. You can, General Torres said. I'm not asking you to give up your piloting career. I'm asking you to take on a new role alongside it. Then yes, Tori said, I'm interested. The announcement of Tori's new position came during a press conference at the Pentagon. General Torres stood beside her as she was officially announced as the head of the Truth and Accountability Task Force. Lieutenant Commander, now Commander, Victoria Hayes represents the best of what the military can be, General Torres said. She embodies integrity, courage, and a commitment to truth that sometimes costs us something. With her leadership, we're going to root out the patterns of abuse that have been allowed to exist in our institution for too long. Tori stood at the podium and spoke about her journey. She talked about the darkness of being accused of something she didn't do. She talked about the light of having justice served. And she talked about what came next. For every person who stands up and tells the truth, she said, there are probably 10 people who don't because they're afraid of what will happen to them. My job now is to make sure that telling the truth is safe. My job is to make sure that people who speak up are protected and supported, not punished. My job is to change the culture that allows people like General Blackwood to operate without consequence. The speech was broadcast on every major news network. It trended on social media. It became, for a moment, the most important conversation happening in America. And more importantly, it opened doors. Other officers came forward with their own stories of abuse of authority. Other soldiers, enlisted personnel, came forward with stories of discrimination and retaliation. The task force that Tori led became a mechanism for change. 3 years after the trial, Commander Victoria Hayes was promoted to captain. She maintained her position as head of the Truth and Accountability Task Force, but she also continued to fly. She was part of an elite group of pilots who worked on special operations, and she loved the work. The task force had investigated over 100 cases of abuse of authority, It had resulted in 23 courts-martial. It had changed the culture of the military in small but significant ways. Officers understood now that abusing their power had consequences. Soldiers understood that speaking up would be taken seriously. The most dramatic moment came when the task force uncovered a systemic pattern of sexual harassment in one of the Navy's most prestigious commands. The commanding officer, an admiral, was forced to resign. Dozens of sailors who had been harassed came forward and received proper investigation and support. Tori was in her office at the Pentagon when she got a call from her mother. "Hi, sweetheart," Dorothy Hayes said. "I just wanted to check in. How are you doing?" "I'm good, Mom," Tori said. "Really good, actually. Work is busy, but in a good way. Your father and I have been so proud watching everything you've accomplished. Not just the promotion or the new position, but how you've handled it all. The grace you've shown. The way you've turned something painful into something that helps other people." Tori felt tears in her eyes. "I learned that from you and Dad. You always taught me that how you handle adversity says more about who you are than how you handle success." "That's true," her mother said. "But you're the one who actually did it. We just gave you the tools." After they hung up, Tori sat in her office and thought about the journey. She thought about the day she received the phone call about the failed trial. She thought about the despair she felt. She thought about the moment General Torres told her she would fight for her. And she thought about all the people who were still out there, still suffering from the same kind of injustice she had suffered from, still afraid to speak up because they didn't know if anyone would believe them or help them. She decided to write a book. It took her 2 years to write it, working in evenings and weekends. She called it Standing Up: How I Learned That Truth Still Matters. In it, she documented the entire experience. The trial, the despair, the investigation, the victory, and more importantly, she wrote about the people behind the scenes who had helped her. General Torres, her lawyer, Patricia Chen, her friend James Morrison, the soldiers she had rescued who came back to testify for her. Her parents, who never stopped believing in her. "None of this happened because I was special," she wrote in the conclusion. "It happened because I was willing to stand up when standing up was hard, and because there were people around me who were willing to stand beside me. That's what creates real change. Not one person being brave, but one brave person inspiring others to be brave too. That's how we change systems. That's how we fix what's broken." The book became a bestseller. It was particularly popular with military personnel, but it also resonated with anyone who had ever faced injustice and wondered if speaking up was worth it. 5 years after the trial, General Margaret Torres retired from active duty. At her retirement ceremony, held at the Pentagon with hundreds of military personnel in attendance, she stood beside Captain Victoria Hayes. "When I first learned about Captain Hayes' case," General Torres told the assembled crowd, "I made a decision. I decided that I was going to use whatever authority and power I had to fight for her, not because it was easy, not because it was politically advantageous, but because it was the right thing to do. And I want to tell you something about the military. This institution is only as strong as the integrity of the people who lead it. If we allow people who abuse their power to go unchecked, we rot from the inside. Captain Hayes gave us the opportunity to check that rot. Her courage allowed us to get better." When it was Tori's turn to speak, she took the podium with steady hands. "General Torres, you taught me something that I didn't learn in any military academy or any training program," she said. "You taught me that power is only meaningful if you're willing to use it in service of what's right. You taught me that being a leader doesn't mean being infallible. It means having the courage to admit when something is wrong and doing whatever it takes to fix it." She paused, looking out at the assembled crowd. "My father never got to see this day. He died when I was 16 years old, serving in the military, giving his life for people he didn't even know. He died believing that the systems we have in place protect and honor the people who serve. He believed that truth matters, that integrity matters, that standing up for what's right matters." Tori's voice grew stronger. "For a moment I doubted that he was right. For a moment I believed that those things didn't matter. That power was the only thing that mattered. But General Torres showed me that I was wrong. She showed me that my father was right. She showed me that if we're willing to stand up, if we're willing to fight for what's right, that we can change things. We can make the system better. We can make it so that the next person doesn't have to go through what I went through." She looked directly at General Torres. "Thank you for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. Thank you for using your power to protect me. And thank you for reminding me why I put on this uniform in the first place, to serve truth, to serve justice, and to serve the people around me. After the ceremony, members of the military lined up to shake Torai's hand. Young women pilots thanked her for showing them that it was possible to be treated with respect in a male-dominated field. Soldiers who had suffered from abuses of authority thanked her for creating the task force that had helped them. Officers thanked her for helping them understand what real leadership looked like. One young woman, a second lieutenant named Angela Martinez, approached Torai with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," Angela said. "I was going to leave the military. My commanding officer was making my life miserable. He was stealing credit for my work. But then I read your book, and I realized that I didn't have to accept that, so I reported it. And something is actually happening. Something is changing. I'm staying now. I'm going to stay and make sure that people like me are treated fairly." Torai pulled the young woman into a hug. "That's exactly why I did it," Torai said. "Not for me, for all the people coming after me who deserve better." 10 years after the trial, an entire generation of military officers had come of age under the new systems that had been put in place. Officers who understood that integrity was not optional. Officers who understood that speaking up about wrongs was not only accepted but expected. Officers who understood that the strength of an institution came not from the power of its leaders, but from the character of its leaders. And at the center of it all was Captain Victoria Hayes, now an admiral herself, continuing to lead the Truth and Accountability Task Force, continuing to fight for justice, continuing to prove that standing up for what's right, even when it costs you something, even when the powerful work against you, even when the system seems stacked against you, that standing up still matters. She kept her Medal of Valor on display in her office. Next to it was a framed photo of her father in his military uniform, and next to that was a quote she had written herself. "I have stood in places where my honor was questioned. I have sat in courtrooms where my integrity was on trial. I have faced the darkness of injustice, and I have come out the other side stronger, clearer, more certain of who I am and what I stand for. That journey taught me that truth is not always convenient. It is not always easy, but it is always necessary, and if enough people are willing to stand up for it, even when standing up costs them something, then we can change the world." The story of Captain Victoria Hayes, of the officer whose medals were nearly stripped, of the woman who stood up and found an ally in a 4-star general, of the courage that led to systemic change, became part of military legend. Young soldiers learned about her at their academies. Parents told their children about her. She became a symbol of what was possible when integrity met courage, met the willingness to fight for what's right. And somewhere in whatever exists after life, her father was smiling. Because she had done exactly what he would have wanted her to do, she had stood up, she had told the truth, and she had changed the system from the inside out. Not because she was special, but because she refused to accept that injustice was just the way things worked. And that made all the difference.